Okay. Going to be learning the 11th chapter of Basi Lagani. The previous Rebbe gave a mimer to be published before his passing, to be printed and distributed on the 10th of Shvat. That's the day the previous Rebbe passed away. And the mimer has 20 chapters. And the Rebbe would explain a chapter every year. So this year, we are now doing Basi Lagani it's a fourth cycle. This is the 70th year since the Rebbe said the first Basi Lagani. And we are in the 11th chapter in the fourth cycle. This chapter is probably the most famous chapter of the entire series of Basi Lagani. In this chapter, the previous Rebbe talks about the idea of victory and how when a king goes to battle, he puts all of his energy into winning that battle, to the extent that all of the treasure houses that were amassed by his ancestors, when it comes to winning the war, the king puts it all out as if it's water, doesn't care, he just lets it out, and he takes all the treasure houses and uses them for the war efforts. And further, the king puts his life aside in order to win this war. I never quoted this mimer often, this chapter often, talking about the sacrifice of the previous Rebbe and how this chapter is also an allusion to the previous Rebbe's own service of Hashem and how he had sacrificed to spread the Torah and to win the war. Winning the war, of course, means that we should see a fulfillment of the title of this discourse, Basi Lagani. And Basi Lagani literally means I've come into my garden, and it refers to many, many things. When Hashem created the world, this world is called God's garden because this is a place where Hashem has great, deep satisfaction. He doesn't have satisfaction from the Garden of Eden, like he has satisfaction from this world. And Hashem puts us here to create great pleasure and satisfaction for him. So when Hashem created the world, he was revealed here in the garden, in this world. And then through the various sins of the 7 generations from Adam until Adam's sin caused God's presence to be hidden from this world. Then his son Cain, through the murder of Hevel, caused God's presence to be more hidden. The language of the Medrash, it caused God's presence to ascend from the 7th heaven to the 6th heaven. And then the subsequent generations each caused God's presence to become more and more hidden until Avram Avinu came around. And Avram Avinu caused God's presence to descend back towards this world, bringing it from the highest heaven to the heaven beneath it. And actually, I said it correctly. Adam caused God's presence to be banished from here to the first heaven, then the subsequent sins until God to the 7th heaven. And through Avram and generations following him, they brought the Shekhinah, God's presence, to be more revealed in this world until it was brought to this world by Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu brought us to Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, and in that revelation of Hashem at Har Sinai, there is a fulfillment of God coming back to the garden. Of course, it doesn't literally mean that Hashem left the world, Chas V'Shalom. There's even a Hasidic song about how crazy it is to think that Hashem, there's a place that's void of Hashem, as the Zohar says, Les Asar Ponim Minei, there's no place void of him. Kachamoir, it's a I don't know why, but the animal of choice of derision in the Hasidic lexicon is the donkey. And then the song goes, you donkey, why do you think that there's a place that's void of Hashem? Anyways, so the the real meaning isn't that Hashem has left the world, God forbid, through sin. What it means is Hashem has become more and more hidden through the various sins, and through the efforts of the seven tzaddikim, from Avram to Moshe Rabbeinu, they cause Hashem's presence to be more revealed until Moshe Rabbeinu does the most important mission, which is to bring God's presence to this world with the giving of the Torah. The giving of the Torah, yes, that is a fulfillment of Hashem coming back to the garden and revealing Himself. As when God gave us the Torah, the birds didn't chirp and the angels didn't sing, and the whole world was enveloped with the presence of Hashem. But the problem, the efficiency of that experience was that it was temporary. But then, after giving the Torah, God commanded us to build the tabernacle, the mobile temple that we had in the desert, and then we had some way of harnessing and revealing God's presence here. But that also was a temporary dwelling. Then there was King Solomon, who built the first temple, and that was a more permanent dwelling. And that was another deeper and higher fulfillment of this verse, I've come to my garden. But the ultimate and truest expression of this verse is when Mashiach will come, when Hashem will, so to speak, come back to His garden and reveal Himself here in this world. And the Rebbe in his very first discourse said that this is the role of our generation. We are the seventh generation from the Alter Rebbe. Our goal isn't in this world not just to cause a temporary revelation like Mount Sinai, not to cause revelation of a temporary house for Hashem like in the Mishkan, not even to cause a permanent home for Hashem like in the first temple, but rather the role of our generation is unique, and that is to bring down the final curtain of the exile and to reveal Hashem in this world forever and ever with the building of the third Beis Hamikdash. So in this chapter, the Rebbe talks about the Friedrich Rebbe, how it's sacrifice for this mission to bring the world to the seventh generation, to bring the world to the generation that would actually get this done. And just like the king puts all his life aside to get the victory, so too the previous Rebbe had sacrificed not just during his lifetime, where you could read any year the previous Rebbe's life was associated with great sacrifices. The Rebbe discusses in many different talks and memorim. But besides the sacrifice of his lifetime, also the previous Rebbe's passing was also associated with Mesiras Nefesh, with his giving his life to win this war. So, but in the discourse, in this chapter, the previous Rebbe talks about this and how Hashem gives treasures to, just like the king puts out all the treasures to help win the war, so too Hashem has, so to speak, in heaven, a treasure house, and we'll see what that means. And Hashem also reveals things for the simple soldiers who have to do what to get the battle won. Hashem gives us these treasures. To who does He give it to? He gives it to us, the simple soldiers on the front lines who have to actually bring about the coming of Mashiach, have to win the war. It's really this discourse and the theme of this discourse really put us on a pedestal that I don't think we think about often enough. I certainly don't. That our role in this generation is far more important than the great tzaddikim of previous generations, and the Rashi and the Rambam and Tosfos and Abaye and Rava and the Gaonim and the Nevi'im. We're the ones who are actually going to tip the scale and bring Mashiach. So our generation is pivotal in making it all happen. And Hashem gives us things, Hashem gives us energies that weren't given to previous generations because of the unique role that we have. Hashem pumps us up with incredible soul powers, gives out the treasure house of heaven in order that we should be able to get the job done. He doesn't hold anything back. Okay, let's go into the chapter 11, the previous Rebbe's discourse, which was said on Purim. The discourse has 20 chapters, and although the original first 6 chapters were meant to be printed on Yud Shvat, the subsequent chapters were meant to be printed at different occasions. This one was given to be printed on Purim. To explain in a deeper way why the Jewish people are called the army of Hashem, the Shem Tzvoi Shem Kodesh, The name Tzvakos is one of the holy names of Hashem. It's from God has 7 names that are forbidden to be erased. There are many other titles that we give Hashem in our davening. We call Hashem Tzaddik, Chassid, Toiv, Chanun, Berachum. But there are 7 names that Rambam lists that are forbidden to be erased. Among them, the name Tzvakos. The Shem is in this Galdei Nevi'im. The first person to call Hashem by this name was Chana. The prophets revealed this name. It wasn't written in the Torah. The Torah in this Hashem Tzvakos, this Tzivas Havaya Kol Yisrael. As a name of God, you don't find the word Tzvakos. You only find this as an adjective describing the Jewish people. They're the Tzivas Hashem, the armies of Hashem. The Torah says when God took us out of Egypt, the Torah says Hashem took out the armies of Hashem, the legions of Hashem out of Egypt. But as a name of God, we only find this name being used by Chana. It wasn't used, we don't find in the Torah Moshe Rabbeinu calling Hashem by this name. Run out of battery? I think we're good. It goes pretty fast, these batteries, don't they? 17% they'll make it in this year, no? Okay. What is this title that we're given, and what do we have in us that makes us worthy of this title, the Army of Hashem? Rabbi Yoel Kahn Zayin Gesund, he often talks about the unique contribution of Hasidus, and he says you can have 2 kinds of soldiers. He says a soldier could be taught to throw a grenade and to shoot a rifle and to jump from an airplane and to be able to squeeze water out of sand or whatever he needs to survive. And he may know all those things very well, but in order for the soldier to be a really good soldier, he has to have faith in victory. He has to believe he's going to win the war. Without that, he is a shvacha soldier. He is a weak soldier. So we're going to see that the classification of our role as being part of the army of Hashem is associated with the idea of victory, that a Jew is meant to be here to win. We're not just to fight, not just to die with our boots on, as many people use that expression. Rather, we're here to win the war. We're here to win. So what is the great virtue that we have because this we're called by this name? And how come this name was given to us specifically when we left Egypt? The explanation is, it's an idea. You could learn how to say a bracha, Baruch Hu Shmei, and Yesh Mei Rabba, and you could say Mantiz Kuru perfectly, and all the right things. But if you don't realize that what you're doing actually makes a difference, and you're going to actually win the war, then all your Mantiz Kurus are shallow. Mantiz Kuru, what are you doing? So the key is to realize that we're part of a battle over here and the stuff, and we're doing something that makes a difference. Where we are, who we are, in the exact moment and circumstances that we're in, we are part of the army of Hashem. Says in Medrash, God says in the Medrash, do you want to know my name? I am called according to my deeds. That means there is no one name for Hashem. A title that we give Hashem has to do with something Hashem is doing. When I fight with the wicked, I am called by the name Tzvakos. That name of God, Tzvakos, is associated with the war. This is also what Rabbi Yosef Gitalia says in Shari Eira. Basically, the Gitalia says that this name of Hashem is associated with the way Hashem limits himself to be projected through the spheres of Netzach and Heid. Hashem does not have any composition or any definition at all, but Hashem chose to connect to this world through 10 spheres. Hashem chose to hide himself and to shine towards us in 10 spheres. Among the 10 spheres are Netzach and Heid. Netzach and Heid are the source of all wars in the world. Why does, as we say in davening every day, we speak about how Hashem is Pel, Gevureis, Esach Hadashes, how Hashem does mighty things, mighty acts. Oyisim Mulchamas, he does wars. When Hashem gives kindness to the world, it's through the attribute of Chesed, this name of God which is associated with Chesed. Just like by a human being, your name is the way other people call you. It's the way you relate to others. So too, Hashem's names are the way Hashem relates to the world. Hashem projects to the world. So when Hashem projects to the world, battle, war, that's associated with Netzach and Heid. What is the relationship between the idea of victory and all the wars in the world? To understand all this, I was going to try to start discussing the whole idea of victory. What is victory about? Who wants to win a war anyways? Where does that come from, that feeling, I need to win? Victory is associated with someone who thinks largely about themselves. They think big. They think that they're the one who is big and they got to win. The Mishu Shafa B'Erech in the Imrim Adam Kenegel Linatzet Imrim Adam Kenegel Linatzech Al Yachal Lanis Aziz. Someone who thinks lowly of themselves, if someone stands against them, they will not be victorious. They could respond with chutzpah. They could respond insolently to someone who stands against them, but they're not going to win. Only someone who is great has this attribute of victory. If someone argues with him, or someone does something that he does not like, he will be victorious and he will make sure that he wins. In a similar way, now it sounds like a negative thing, right? It sounds like a guy is so arrogant. So there is an element of arrogance as well. It's possible that this attribute could be used in the wrong way. As Rebbe writes in many letters to people in institutions who are there, they can't get along with each other, and the whole institution is suffering because of infighting between various people in an institution. So of course this could be a negative thing as well. And Rebbe also writes many letters to people who are involved in public affairs and communal affairs, how sometimes the broadside of attack is the worst method. Trying to, I know a Jew, Alav Shalom, Rabbi, what's his name? He's a rabbi in Italy. I remember his name in a minute. He once shared with me how he was asked to say in his synagogue, there's a certain blessing that many people say, which is not really so kosher to say. The blessing is about how the state of Israel is the beginning of the coming of Mashiach, and according to halacha, that's not the coming of Mashiach. The Rambam says that the coming of Mashiach begins with a descendant of King David who is going to fight the wars of Hashem, and so saying this blessing is sacrilegious. You're not allowed to make up your own blessing. Not to say Hashem's name in vain. But he had this problem. Or Rabbi Chadad told me the story. Rabbi Chadad said that he asked the Rebbe in a private audience, what should he do? He knew how the Rebbe spoke so forcefully, how this is a wrong blessing to say, and how saying the state of Israel is the beginning of the coming of Mashiach is a very wrong thing to think, and how we haven't even begun the Geula. Geula hasn't started yet. So he was unsure how to proceed as a rabbi of the synagogue when he was honored to say this blessing. What should he do? So the Rebbe responded interestingly in this situation. Although the Rebbe spoke openly and forcefully, how this is not something the Rebbe is hiding behind, but and it sounds like the way the Rebbe phrased it, this is something that we should also speak openly about. But in this particular instance, the Rebbe told them, tell them, a rabbi doesn't have to say every single blessing. That's because you're the rabbi. Don't say every blessing. Let someone else say the blessing. That's what worked in that situation, in that synagogue. So the idea of being victorious and wanting to win isn't always a positive trait. However, the Gemara says the following. The Gemara says, any Talmud Chacham who does not take vengeance and bear a grudge like a snake is not a Talmud Chacham. In order to be considered a wise person, the Torah considers him to be wise, you have to be vengeful and bear a grudge like a snake. What does that mean? You have to be vengeful and preserve the grievance in your heart like a snake. Marsha explains the idea of a snake specifically is associated how the snake has no pleasure in biting anybody. It's not like the snake enjoys biting anybody, but the Talmud Chacham is meant to be forceful and to stand up for what has to happen and to make sure that the honor of Torah is protected. And he can't just sit back on the sideline and say, let someone else make decisions which are against Torah. He has to take a leadership role. And if he doesn't, he's not a Talmud Chacham. If the Gemara asks, 1 second, in the Torah it says, you shall not bear a grudge, you shall not take vengeance. The Gemara gives the example over there. If Yankel asks to borrow your shovel, Yankel says, I need to shovel my walk. And you Californians don't know what I'm talking about. It's snowing, you need to shovel your walk, right? So Yankel asks you to borrow your shovel. And you asked Yankel for his shovel the week before. And Yankel had a shovel and give you the shovel. So vengeance, the comma means to say, I'm not lending you my shovel, just like you didn't lend me your shovel. That's vengeance. Bearing a grudge is to say, here's the shovel. I'm not like you. Like that, huh? Now I'll do that. It's treif. So Talmud Chacham does that. The Gemara says that it has to be understood.
You could think it though.
What?
You could think it.
Is that true?
For me.
In Tanya, it says in Tanya in chapter 12 that we should learn from the Zohar to be like Yosef HaTzadik and to do exactly the opposite of how you feel, and the exact exceedingly kind specifically to someone who's wronged you.
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, the best vengeance because they know. Anyways, but no, it says in Tanya also. It says in Tanya.
What you think is worse than what you say.
Against the Tanya. It says in Tanya that speaking Lashon Hara is not so good. Of course, it's equal to the 3 Averas of murder, idolatry, and adultery. But doesn't Tanya thinking bad about somebody is worse? Doesn't the Torah clearly? The Alter says in Tanya it's worse, but in Tanya, the Torah says clearly you're not allowed to think bad about it. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. Because you're not not hate your brother in your heart. So you're not allowed to think about someone's shortcomings. It's an Avera. Just like the mitzvah to love Hashem, which means the Baal Shem Tov says to think about Hashem's greatness. Mitzvah of loving a Jew means to think about their greatness, think about their virtues. It's Bashar mitzvah. It's biblical. It's biblical. Anyway, so you're not allowed to preserve in your heart either. So what is this Talmud Chacham doing? How come he is so vengeful and how come he is so spiteful? The vengeance that the Talmud Chacham is meant to espouse is not the kind of vengeance the Torah describes. When the Torah says not to be vengeful, the Torah is talking about financial things. Next page, it's not that Talmud Chacham is supposed to, in order to protect his financial interests, he has to be vengeful, make sure and not lend anybody a shovel. If someone asks him for a shovel, he can't get no. He certainly should get the guy the shovel. It's not for the sake of money or something that is achieved through money. That is considered vengeance, which is forbidden in the Torah. Rather, we're talking about doing something for the sake of the protection of Torah, as the Gemara gives example over there about King David, and how King David remembered those who wronged him in order to fight the wars of Hashem. And the condition, though, is over here is you have to be a Talmud Chacham. In order to be able to correctly decide when is appropriate to give vengeance and when is not appropriate to give vengeance, you've got to be Talmud Chacham. It reminds me of the Rebbe's comment on the end of chapter 32 in Tanya. End of chapter 32 in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, uncharacteristic to the rest of Tanya, Alter Rebbe quotes King David. Usually in Tanya, when he quotes a verse, the Alter Rebbe quotes the verse. He doesn't say who authored the verse. He doesn't say like a Moshe Rabbeinu says, or like David says, there are exceptions, but whenever there's an exception, there's a reason. So at the end of this chapter 32 in Tanya, he says, King David says, I hate them with absolute hatred. And the Alter Rebbe says he's referring to people who totally deny Hashem, and concerning those people, it is befitting to actually hate them completely. But the Rebbe says the reason he mentions King David is because in order to be able to know who this means, you got to be like King David. Only King David is the one who has the authority to do this. In fact, the Rebbe said the previous Rebbe famously did not act in this way. In the Gemara, in the Shulchan Aruch Code of Jewish Law, and then the Code of Jewish Law, it says there are certain people that if they go up a ladder, they go down a ladder, you're not supposed to bring a ladder to help them get out. Most people, if you have to give a ladder, you have to bring a ladder to help them get out. Certain people, don't bring them a ladder. Certain people, the says in the Code of Jewish Law, they're down there in the pit, take away the ladder. So they asked the previous Rebbe, how is it that you are bringing some people close to you, close to Torah, when the Talmud says these are the kind of people that fit right into the classification of those who have meant to try to get at them. So the previous Rebbe said, if you noticed in Code of Jewish Law, there is the beginning and there is the end. This is the very end of the Code of Jewish Law. The reason why this is at the very end of the Code of Jewish Law is because only someone who has learned the entire Code of Jewish Law can classify who fits in this category. So don't try this at home, folks. Don't say, I'm a Talmud Chacham, I'm a wise man, and therefore I could do whatever any vengeance I seek. It's a big mistake. Or at the very least, it says in the Arizal says that in the generation that will greet Mashiach, the wives of the wise men will rule over their husbands. So maybe ask your wife first. Okay, fine. Don't do that either. You should just be nice and kind and not consider yourself to be so wise. It's always better to be kind than to be wise. And don't consider yourself to be in the category of giving this vengeance. And it's a rule of thumb is that if you think you're the guy, you're not. Anyways, have a great day.